welcome to this episode of the DigiPod on DawnNews English. My name is Farieha Aziz. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Dovan Rai. She is the Executive Director of Body and Data based in Kathmandu, Nepal. Thank you for joining us on DigiPod. Today, what we're discussing is looking at the internet and the digital spaces from a gendered lens, specifically AI, because often AI discussions tend to be very technical and address a lot of other aspects. But today we're going to particularly focus on the gendered aspect, which has to do with algorithms.
Yeah, so right now, I'm working at Body and Data, and Body and Data is a nonprofit organization that is working at the intersection of digital rights with the feminist lens. So we actually work for, this feminist internet, and it has been working since 2017. And I've joined for a year now. Yeah.
And so when you talk about a feminist internet or the gendered perspective, we've been a part of conversations about platform accountability and moderation and etc. But there's a lot of discussion nowadays about algorithms and the design aspect of technology. Can you speak a little more about, and also because you have, an engineering background, etc. What does this exactly mean when we talk about safer design or how algorithms are designed or, play out?
Okay, so no, I think that's a very relevant discourse, right? So when because sometimes when we think about technology, we think it's something of some kind of deterministic system, right? And some kind of very so there's technological determinism and technological optimism. And talking about my own journey, right? I did my PhD in computer science, trying to do research in how to use AI in education. And right now I'm with Body and Data talking about digital rights and creating this feminist internet. And as we have also seen, how the technological landscape, how it has revealed itself. I think in like at the turn of the century, in 2000 and the first decade of 2000 and even till 2015, right? We all talked about how, technology is going to bring about democracy and social justice and, all that. And while there's a lot of potential for that, I think the technology still has a lot of potential to democratize our societies and even to democratize, access to information. But now we are seeing is like how, given how, the technology is kind of governed and how it is created and it owned, we are seeing this all kind of impact of technology, right? So at Board and Data, we are trying to, co-create like how we can make the internet and the digital space that is safe, that is accessible, and that is just for everyone.
So you just spoke about obviously ownership, how platforms are being governed, and this I think is a big debate, right? Which goes back to again the engineering of these platforms, and so the harms that we see, and then what happens or what is done about the harms. What is your lens on that, especially from the background, like a computer science background, where and especially with AI? And like you said, that it isn't, I mean, people think, oh, technology is just neutral, but technology is not just neutral, is it?
Yeah, no, I think that is one of the big misconception, right? How we understand technology. I mean, technology is always like, there's always, the impact is based on who designs is, how it is designed, how it is being used. But AI and in machine learning in particular is highly, highly malleable, and it is not some objective deterministic system, right? This is a very probabilistic, this is very highly malleable system. And I think this distinction is very important because we think that, oh, this is algorithm, it could be objective, and it could be neutral, it can't be racist, right? But how these machine learning algorithms are created, it's not, hand coded by people, but rather it is created when it looks at the, pattern in the data itself, right? And we have to understand how the data is being created, how it is being consumed. So the machine learning is actually not only some kind of neutral innovation, but rather it is the mirror of our society itself. So I think that that distinction is really crucial.
So would it be accurate to say that a lot of your our social sort of biases and preconceptions go into what is fed again. And also, if you could explain, maybe perhaps getting before getting to that, to the audience, right, just how AI works, because it can be a little bit technical for a layperson to understand, right? When you say, let's say, machine learning, LLMs, or like, what is a training model? And also AI, then there's generative AI, all of these different terms.
Yeah, again, whole when it comes to AI, because I think one of, again, the distinction I really want to emphasize is AI right now, it is not just technology, it is big business, it is a lot of power, right? It is a lot of geopolitical construct as well. And so artificial intelligence in itself is such a very like a vague word. It's not even a scientific word, it is mostly used as let's say more on the business domain. And throughout, since 1950s when it was first coined, this AI has meant different things in different decades for different people. But currently, so machine learning is a subset of AI technique. It's actually a technique that is used to build those supposedly intelligent algorithms. So machine learning basically it is explicit what it does. So you give it a lot of data, in terms of maybe some text, images, video, different modalities of data you give it to the machine, and then it finds some the statistical pattern in the data and it tries to create its own model, right? Okay, this is how those different entities are related. So based on the data and based on the pattern it sees, it creates some kind of like model, which is very probabilistic, right? There's nothing, it's not like a database, not like a knowledge graph, right? It's all the probabilistic association. So based on that probabilistic association, when you give it a new problem to solve, right, it is going to kind of use those past patterns to predict, how it is going to be. For example, if it has to identify like Faria, your image, so we give it a lot of your images, right, in different settings. And then the machine learning algorithm is going to look at your maybe like hundreds and thousands of images, and it is going to find some pattern in your facial features. And whenever some new image is given to it, it is going to predict whether this picture belongs to you or not. So the kind of this probabilistic mapping is very inherent part of it. And going back to the question about like this bias with the machine learning is because as it said, right? Because your machine learning algorithm can only be as good as accurate as the training data, right? If your data is biased, if you have very few sample of data, right? If the machine only sees data, of you in certain settings, it might not recognize you in a different setting, right? So it is heavily dependent on how the data, is like. And then there's this kind of like a implicit bias that goes, whatever the bias and discrimination is the data that is going to be encoded in the algorithm itself. That is this implicit thing. But then it's not just like a training from the data, but there's also like there are like some humans who are going to do the fine tuning, right? For example, the LLM you use, the generative AI you use, it's not just like there's like it is first trained on the data, but then there's like a huge set of people who are actually going to observe how the model is doing, and those human beings also kind of tweak those models. And then there's your another like kind of recommended system that is going to look at different parameters, right? So there's also kind of like explicit thing going on based on how you are kind of giving feedback to the model and how different settings you are using. So there's kind of like again it depends on like the design of the design of the application. So the bias can seep in into like a two process, like from the data itself and from the design, from the setting, from the moderation policy and the like engagement matrix, right? There's also kind of all this bias can go into the machine learning systems.
So, what problem does this pose, especially, or what have you seen play out in real terms when you talk about bias, especially when it comes to, let's say, from a gendered perspective for marginalized groups, for instance? How has this, because everybody talks about AI as this, again, like we spoke about technology and platforms as leveler of democracy, etc., but we've seen a backsliding there. What have you seen with respect to AI? from a gendered and marginalized group perspective?
Yeah, so the thing is, as I mentioned, this is trained on your data. So I think for women and the minorities and the marginalized community, there's like a few representation of them, right? There's limited representation of them. Whereas maybe for like let's say white male, there's like a very diverse representation of them, right? So your machine learning becomes more accurate, more dynamic. But the fewer data it has and the more marginalized certain community is, the accuracy is really, the suffers. And you can see that, in lot of instances, like for example, there was this landmark paper, I think in 2016, something like that. So there was this app that is going to determine your gender. And for white male, the accuracy was as high as 100%, but for the colored women, it was, 60% or 70% as low as that, right? And you can imagine those kind of, image recognition system being used for law enforcement, for all kind of legal metrics. And also there has been not one, but multiple cases, when you use these AI recruitment tools. So what they do is actually they kind of like penalize the minorities. So again, there was this one famous case, right? How the Amazon created is like AI recruitment tool, and whenever there's some kind of indication that the applicant could be a female, whether she's a female chess champion or whether she went to this like female college, she could be a top in female college, but whenever it gets some indication that she's a female, it is really going to downgrade that application because it looks at its current body of employees and is like disproportionately male, right? So this is how, and it's really crucial when those systems go into very crucial like law enforcement, recruitment, law, loan, financial decision making. Um, and here again, also like the if you are come from this, socioeconomically poor background, the system really penalizes for your ability, right? If you come from this community and if you are individually, more competent, but then it kind of it looks make this like statistical mapping, and if you come from certain neighborhood, if you come from certain like let's say caste, then it is already going to assume that you are not as competent. So what it does is like not only reflects the bias in the data, but it can actually do the amplify it. And there's something called positive feedback loop. It can actually amplify the bias, and actually it is really concerning. And yeah.
We're seeing this trend in South Asia as well, right? Whether it's policing, law enforcement, government, that, oh, let's do everything to do with AI because AI is the next new thing. Could you also then talk about, I mean, why we need to be a little cautious? I mean, AI can be harnessed for good things as well, but there are certain things that if we start replicating existing bias, and we know in our South Asian context what that leads to, right? And also that there's a environmental concern with respect to AI.
Yeah, so again, and this is when I talk to my fellow Nepali people, I always say that, right? I think for Nepali people, we need to be more cautious when we use this AI system because most of the data in the internet, like, it is from the global north, right? Not necessarily from our context. So there is already this bias. And if we talk about, again, marginalized community within a, country, so I think like the developing countries like Nepal and South Asia, and given all this like socio-political and again we really a lot of these big tech platforms, right? Of course, there's a lot of software engineers from the South Asian descent over there. I don't know how much they how their decision making, or the sensibility or the worldview, how much it is impacted. So, and I really think that, the global South and South Asia and like small countries like Nepal, we really, really have to be even more cautious. And talking about Nepali context, there's something called, the FOMO, fear of missing out, right? And especially when you think about technology, we think it's some very like a very colonial perspective, something that is very important. Like we import our smartphone, we import our smart screens, and we import AI systems. So we don't have the self-efficacy that we can actually make our own decisions. We can actually customize it, we can actually deconstruct it, we can create our own AI framework. I think there's a huge lack of self-efficacy. So there's a real huge concern. And talking about this climate thing, right now, there's uh, more reports. And actually, I really want to mention the really important work done by Kieran Howe. She has recently even published a book where she talks about how, and actually, it's not only her. There's a lot of scientific reports, and even I think the big tech also have. They are not as often, but they have also kind of conceded to some level how much the because the current machine learning, it is very resource intensive. It's like very based on scale. It's not the most efficient way to do build AI. And there's already a lot of debate on that. Because machine learning is, and especially the large language model based AI, is only one technique. But a lot of big tech are putting all their bet on that. And that particular modality of creating AI is highly wasteful, not sustainable at all. And as they are being even more resource hungry, they are actually going to the vulnerable communities. A lot of in Latin America, the South America, there has been kind of actually a lot of citizen outrage and protests against that. I think they are going to some parts in Chile and these places, and they are creating these huge data centers. And because the data centers need a lot of electricity and also fresh water, right? And also not only is because fresh water is going to be one of the huge, scarce resource, and they consume both those electricity and fresh water resource. And again, that is really concerning. And because we don't have a lot of because this what AI, it has become this very black box, very fuzzy thing, and there's a lot of hype around it. And you don't know who from those countries government who is going to talk to these people. Again, I really don't want to sound alarmist, right? Because when I joined my PhD program, I was expecting that, oh, I'm going to sound alarm about the technology that I am doing research, right? But whatever we have seen in this like a 5 to 10 years, yeah, I think things are really alarming.
But there's a reason, I mean, we have to, especially in the South Asian context with energy scarcity and water. This is an important thing to know. But is there a way for this to be sustainable? For AI and machine learning to be sustainable?
Yeah, actually, again, so again, this the technology, again, we think some kind of this very linear progression, right? But again, technology is not something. It's not the earthquake that happens, not the tornado that falls, right? It's something that we humans create. We humans have the full agency. What technology we create, what kind of technology we create, right? So with the current form of technology, right? Again, when we think about AI, we think about maybe chat GPT, we think about LLM. Again, I really want to say again, this is only one category, one technique of among the many techniques, right? So as long as we stick to this particular technique that is very based on the scale, it needs a lot of data, and it needs a lot of data center. So it's a very resource hungry modality. So as long as we stick to this approach of AI, then I don't think that's sustainable. Sustainable is something that we are going to, achieve. So there should be a really rehaul, some kind of reframing about maybe we need to find new ways to do AI, right? Or maybe we need to pause a little bit. Okay, we can maybe you don't have to keep on making it more bigger and bigger. If you don't make it bigger in 5 years, nothing is going to happen, right? What if if our AI system doesn't become, let's say, like 0.12% more efficient, let's say, or 0.1% bigger than the current form, the humanity is not going to lag behind. Nothing is going to happen, right? So the decision making is coming from the big take, right? All the big players. So they are the one who thinks that they are creating this very false narrative, this very fear mongering, very hyping, that we cannot afford to pause, or we cannot afford to pause and reflect and find different, because we did with the nuclear power, right? We didn't just go and move away. And maybe there's a different way of doing nuclear power, or maybe we don't need nuclear power. The same thing with this current form of AI that is very unsustainable. I think we can really take a pause and find different ways, but which is not happening. And again, I really want to add this context that recently the bill that is being in, the Trump, this big beautiful bill, right? And one of the prominent, the thing is there, they are proposing that not to do AI regulation for 10 years. So the states are kind of prohibited from putting any regulation from AI, and yeah, it's just like saying that you don't put regulation on nuclear power, right? Or yeah, it's ridiculous.
And there are concerns, right, in terms of the ethical use of, I mean, how data is being fed or what is happening with AI models, but also if you can speak a little bit about hallucinations is something that you've also, how AI hallucinates, or also,
Yeah,
and there's a certain, I mean, there are a lot of articles now, and not to just, focus on the negatives, and we will talk about its uses just as we
yeah.
close up, but just so that people should know because it's a whole psychosis now, and a lot of studies being published about how people are engaging, what that's doing to their mental health and state.
Yeah, so the thing is, again, hallucination is, again, when you say, oh, machine is hallucinating, we might anthropomorphize it, right? But it is just an anthropomorphizing term. But when hallucination is not actually some kind of deviation from how the machine learning works, actually, it is the integral part of how machine learning works because it works on the probability, right? So when you are working on the probability, 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, there is always this margin of error. So maybe sometimes it gives in the 90% probability it is right and sometimes it is wrong. So what it does is like the machine, it doesn't have some kind of knowledge base. It doesn't have some knowledge database that it kind of, it's not like a librarian picking a book and, setting from it, right? It's just all these different parameters and tokens interrelated in this kind of this black box, this interlink. Nobody actually, it's not interpretable. Nobody can actually open it and see how it is working, right? It's just like this massive statistical pattern. So based on the pattern, sometimes it acts, says the correct thing, and sometimes it says the incorrect thing. And when you have a lot of training data, the error rate goes down. But if you have fewer data, the error rate goes up, right? So this is actually not some kind of deviation. It's not some kind of malfunctioning the machine learning can fix, but it is really integral part of it. Again, as long as we have this model of this machine learning, the hallucination is always going to be there. And connected to your other thing, like this, when people use a lot of chat GPT, there's some kind of like the psychosis, spiritual psychosis going on, right? And I think there are again, and I think it really highlights the two dual impact it is having on our society, right? So one is, let's say, because the generative AI, those large language models, they are very malleable. They can just go anyway. Because they can go any pathway. So based on your interaction, because the LLM is turned to be very like very people pleasing, it gives you a lot of validation. So sometimes when you talk to a lot of this generative AI, this large language model, it can really reinforce your own biases. It can really reinforce your own delusions, right? And people, yeah, it can go to that. And the other thing I think is really important is because with all the technology and social media, how fragmented our society has become, how much anxiety there is, how much loneliness there is, people are, you know, just normally losing their, the anxiety and loneliness, everything, they are becoming more untethered, more destabilized. And I think like human beings are already destabilized, and you have this system that can really reinforce. So, and those two mix, I think it's not a good news.
So the final sort of question on how it is obviously from the Hans perspective when we're because AI is being integrated into, how do we deal with deep fakes from a gendered perspective as well, or content moderation, etc. And you're saying there's this margin for error, which we've seen in the fact checking side. But what can be done differently, or do you think that there shouldn't be sole reliance on AI when we talk about navigating or managing harms, addressing harms online, specifically from a gendered perspective, in terms of also slurs, etc., and other things, how to flag, how to address.
Yeah, so again, as you mentioned, right? Again, because we are talking about harms, because this is something that people need to know, right? But we are not kind of like saying that, oh, AI is all harmful, like it's going to be harmful, as it is. But again, there is like the for the machine learning in particular, right? I mean, we can make it more, less harmful, more pro-social, again, by trying to make our training data as diverse, as responsible as possible. and also the design of it, like we can also see the difference between Twitter and X, right? There is possibility to make your AI more responsible, more sensible if you put the right, moderation policy, right kind of design policies, right? Your system can kind of like, be more responsible and sensible. But at the end of the day, I think what it ties to again this whole bigger power structure, right? Who owns AI? Who is creating AI, right? So, and I think we talked about at different venues, right? So, I think the technology, how it is being envisioned, how it is being owned and designed, I think we need to have this very fundamental change in that. So when the collective of, or let's say when the community kind of community owned, or like the technology that is responsible to the community, and when there is kind of diverse and inclusive participation from different kind of stakeholders, from the design, from the whole loop, right? Not just at the end, right? From the design and envisioning itself. I think yeah, I mean, technology is really a friend of humanity, and we can use it that way.
So, as we round off, just because you've also worked on creating educational um, technology, etc. So again, now that we are in the age of AI and there's no escaping it, and tomorrow we don't know what else is going to be there. And since you mentioned about how you need to have that vision for design, what are some of the things that can be done, whether it's from an educational, informative point of view, but also for a more feminist internet, for a more equitable internet access, but also so that gendered minorities are not driven off the internet because of what they face online. Are there solutions? Can we be looking at certain solutions?
Yeah, right. So the thing is basically those computer systems are optimization machines, right? You give some metric and you try to optimize towards that. So if you want to optimize for engagement, it is just going to give you the content, it is just going to produce the thing that is just focused on making highly engaging materials, whether it is racist, whether it is unfair, whether it is kind of polarizing. So you can set the engage, the optimization metric, right? And actually that's something you can set it, right? Maybe you want to not necessarily, optimize for the ultimate engagement. You want to make a balance between making it engaging, but also making it responsible, right? And also maybe you don't only try to give the most probable, right, or the most sensitive thing. Maybe you want to find more diverse set of opinion, maybe more diverse set of content, right? Or maybe you want to again like be really careful on like you put this effort in trying to find the data that is truly representative, right? And a lot of or you really put a lot of energy and resource and people in trying to create this responsible data set, right? And again, talking particularly about the machine learning, right? From really steep, just finding data, labeling data, right? And putting that, the optimization metrics, right? And also the other thing is like you really need to explore other kind of AI techniques, right? Because the current AI is not explainable, it is not interpretable. So that's why it is not accountable, right? Because the people say, oh, we don't know how it did, right? The OpenAI just can't say that. So you need to put some very resource in trying to create more interpretable models, right? The models that can also work as good with the small data. Again, as long as we rely on the big data, the big companies are going to have an upper hand. So yeah, in conclusion, we can actually change the optimization matrix in our current system. But again, I really want to emphasize that we really need to explore other modalities of creating this AI system in itself.
On that note, thank you, Dr. Dovan Rai, for joining DawnNews English. This is all that we have on the DigiPod today, and we will be back with more later. Thank you.